Hello, and welcome to episode 3 of the Snackable HPC Notes video series. For this episode, I'm going to run through my top 10 hits and misses of SC20 Supercomputing Conference last week, with 7 hits and 3 misses. So let's start with the misses. In third place, SC20 for me, and I hear for many others, was much less of an immersive experience this year due to being virtual. In a normal year, SC wholly absorbs your attention, especially if you're physically attending. You don't have any time or space for anything else really. But even if you're not attending, and I know this from personal experience on the odd occasions I've not attended SC myself, the week and the events and so on, even from afar, still have a big effect on your week and your time. But this year I've heard a lot of people say that they were only partially engaged with SC, with it being so much easier to get distracted by normal life. And certainly I only spent a small portion of my time focused on SC this year. In second place, the technology providers, the vendors and so on. The SC organisers did everything they could, I think, to build a virtual exhibition. And it was very impressive what was built. But of course, it wasn't anything close to the impact or the vibe of the real thing. And in fact, even beyond the exhibition, apparently there were much fewer vendor briefings and meetings and so on during SC. And that would normally be a major part of the week, both for the technology providers, the vendors, the customers and so on. So I think, in fact, I would go beyond that. I would even argue that there seem to be fewer than normal significant news stories around the technology and products and vendor space. So that for me was a bit of a miss for this year. I think in first place, the biggest miss of SC20 would of course be the people side, or the lack of people. Virtual SC20 did a solid job of delivering the technical content. However, I think the experience also drove home beyond doubt how much the core value of SC is around the people as well as the content. In fact, maybe even instead of the content. The lack of opportunity to meet old friends and new people, to network, to build relationships, etc., was the big miss this year. So onwards to the hits. In seventh place, the widening of access to and the widening consumption of the technical content of SC. So with the technical program being made available wholly online, it reached many more people who would never normally attend SC. And I think even from those who would normally attend SC, as I said, with there being fewer other meetings and side distractions going on, I think more people were able to take a look at some of the technical content. So as far as I can tell, I don't have access to the actual statistics, but as far as I could tell, right here anecdotally, there was an increased participation in the technical program this year, with a wider range of people getting involved, and more people committing more time to it than they would normally. So I think that's kind of a bit of a double lesson actually, for SC for the technical content. Maybe something we can try and figure out for the future is how to make sure that this technical content is made available as widely as possible. In sixth place, the GPU wars are heating up. So we've had a few years of competition now in the processor space in HPC, with a diversity and a number of credible choices in the ecosystem. But the GPU space is being pretty much owned by NVIDIA, with minimal effective competition from elsewhere. SC20 saw strong news from NVIDIA, particularly around the A100 GPU. With multiple cloud providers, including Azure, of course, and multiple HPC centers, and of course NVIDIA themselves, making announcements around the A100 GPU, and it's pretty much the dominant player for AI workloads at the moment. But it was also good to see some announcements around AMD's MI100 GPU, which appears to be taking more of a performance lead on traditional FP64 HPC applications. So it's good to see this competition in the GPU space. I think it's going to be, having available two credible families, to competitive families of GPUs, will be good for the community, it'll be good for customers, it'll be good for the ecosystem as a whole. In fifth place, I think would be the community-led networking activities. So recognizing the importance of the people side of HPC, there were various good attempts at virtual networking throughout the week. For example, there was the LRZ beer gardens, although of course virtual beer is not quite the same as the real stuff. There was the Beowulf Bash, which I didn't attend, but apparently was much fun, and good technical conversations as well. There was the HPE and Intel sponsored online party, which included a performance by a band called Weezer, and then of course there was the daily special editions of the HPC huddles. So the HPC huddles have been going on weekly since the early days of the lockdown, and have kind of become the default or the primary open networking and community conversation event on a weekly basis of the community. And so there were a number of individual-led or organization-led or community-led events on the networking and people side of HPC. In fourth place, I'm going to put the top 500 list. So I think, yes, SC20 exposed several of the traditions and institutions of SC that I think we realise perhaps don't hit the mark quite as much as they used to anymore. But for me, at least, top 500 is not one of those. It is an institution that still has great value and interest. It proved itself again as a useful indicator of trends and issues in the world of HPC. People will say that HPL, LINPACK, as a benchmark is not representative of real applications. Any single benchmark will not be able to properly represent the majority of HPC applications. There's just too many different types of applications. But frankly, it's irrelevant anyways, because the top 500, it's not about the benchmark, it's about the list. It's about the 500 data points twice a year and the consistent recording of that over time. And therefore about the trends in the list and so on. So for example, this year, you can see how it reflected the community in a number of ways. The small number of new entries on the list reflects the economics and the logistic challenges that are present in 2020. NVIDIA's Selene supercomputer doubled in size to jump up to the number 5 position, but equally well, they could have listed both halves of that system separately and taken 2 spots in the number 10. Sorry, 2 spots in the top 10 of the list. And that reflects the strength of NVIDIA's position in the HPC world right now. The additional capacity added to the Fugaku system would have been a top 10 system in its own right if they'd chosen to list that separately, which reflects just how much of a leadership position Fugaku has over the list at the moment, or over the community as a whole. And then, of course, there was the Saudi Aramco system, which came in at number 10, which reminds us of 2 things. It reminds us that industry is and always has been a big player in supercomputing. It also reminds us or shows the continued, relatively recent march of GPUs into the oil and gas space, finally breaking through after a number of years of being pretty much CPU dominated space. And so now onwards to the top prizes, the medal positions. The bronze medal, 3rd place, is Mango. So SC 2020 will always be the year of the Mango. If you have no idea what this is all about, then watch episode 1 of this series, search the resulting community fun on Twitter, and join in the fun that was the Mangoes as a service and everything else. In the silver medal place, my number 2 hit of SC20 is storage. So as most major HPC architects and users will know, storage is one of the most critical parts of the supercomputing furniture. Unfortunately, is it often treated as the poor cousin of the compute side of HPC. So it was good to see, as far as I thought, some more prominence for HPC's news, storage news during SC20. So, for example, the updates on Intel's Deos, the IO 500, and the discussion that ensued from the number 1 result on that IO 500 list, the system using the MAD-FS technology, which wasn't particularly documented in detail, and the discussion around that. But the fact that that number 1 position was so far ahead of the rest of the list, and then other things as well. So, you know, Azure's 1.4 terabytes per second performance result using BGFS based configuration and so on. So I think storage had a good role and a good prominence in SC this year. Which brings me, of course, to the first place, the gold medal position, my top hit of SC 2020. And as we think through this one, it's important to recognise the people that bring the circus of SC to our screens. This includes the HPC journalists who work extraordinary hours during SC week and the week leading up to SC to keep us fed with the major stories, draw out the key observations, the key facts, providing analysis and so on. It includes individuals on Twitter, for example, such as HPC Guru, who deliver an essential stream of the key news and the key goings on, provide some community conversation, and dig into some of the stories behind the stories. However, the standout example for me, taking the gold position, is what has become an institution of SC, something that I look forward to every year. And in fact, I wonder how it's been achieved every year. It's pretty impressive work. And I'm speaking, of course, of Glenn Lockwood's PostSC WrapUp blog. He covers a wonderfully wide range of topics with facts, with references, with analysis and opinion. And it's a must read at the tradition at the end of every SC. So there you go. That's my top 10 of SC20. 7 hits, 3 misses. I am very sure that some of you will disagree with my list, both in terms of things I've included or in things I've somehow missed out that would be obvious to you. Please do feel free to engage in the conversation with the comments or on Twitter elsewhere with what you would have included or changed about my list. But that's all for episode 3. Keep an eye out for future episodes. Always welcome suggestions for content, and see you all again next time. Thank you.